Welcome back. So we are going to get started by learning about lists. So just from your own maybe guess, so you have maybe a shopping list. So that's a list, or it's just maybe a it might be a random order or an ordered type of list. So maybe we have maybe an integer. So let's create a simple list here, a list of integers. Then let's give it maybe just a random name. So let's call it maybe numbers. So remember in Python, lists are created with the opening and closing square brackets. So any element that comes in between these plus, these all elements becomes automatically a list. So the next thing we want to actually do is we can still create maybe a list of strings. So maybe let's say we have a family. So we can actually create a list of family members. So maybe like we have Owen, then we have Juma. So let's say we do also have oh Papi, okay. Then we do also maybe have Chelsea. Then maybe we do now have maybe Kisaka. So this happens actually in one of the actually easiest way. So if you do this, the compiler will automatically tell Python, hey Python, this is a list. Now to print all these elements, then we can maybe print. We can just use the print method. Then you pass in the numbers. Then again, you can also print the strings using family. So when you run this program now, you see that our first list here is integers, then the second thing here is the list of strings. So remember, strings always come in double quotes. So when you actually at the start of a string, you make sure that the string has been closed to make sure that all your elements in this list are actually a list. So what happens if we now do this? So maybe we have other elements, so let's say 2. Then instead of that, we now have 6. Now let's see what will happen. Well, it gets printed. So while actually printing list, you can actually mix integers and the strings, but actually it's not advisable. But for some cases where you might be needed to, you can use them, but not actually advised in Python. So let's say we want to start accessing elements in a list. So maybe we have these all elements here. So the next thing we want to do is, let's say we want to access the first element, which is number 6. So to do that, we are going to use indexing. And remember, indexing always starts with 0, and it's always -1. So the last element is always n-1. So for example, in our case, we have 6, Juma, 2, Chelsea, Kisaka. So these are first, second, third, fourth, and fifth element. So our indexing will end at 4 because we start at index 0. That is 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now to automatically print our first element, so we're going to use the print method. Then we are going to say family. And to access elements, remember actually that we use the opening and closing square brackets. So to access the first element, we use number 0. So that should be the index 0. So that throws in actually number 6. So what happens if you want to now access Kisaka? So the easiest way you can do is we can now say we have index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can now place here our fourth index. Then if we run the program, we now have Kisaka. So the next thing is what happens in scenarios whereby we have maybe a long list. So maybe we have Shem and the rest. So what happens in this case? So to actually have the simplest and the most simple way to access this, you can use the nth -1. So that is actually the -1, the first, not actually the and, but the -1. The negative one will always print actually the last element. So this is just an index. So an index. So we're going to remove that. So to run this, then we're going to automatically access shim because in some cases the list might be too long and you want to access the last element. So I'm going to clear my output there. So we can still apply actually slicing. So let's try apply some slicing here. So remember in slicing, we use the full colon to print actually all elements. So when we have a number here, n, this means it will print from the nth element. So if you now place 2 here, it will print from the second element, that should be 0, 1, 2, from number 2 all the way to the last actually element. So, and in cases where we now have the nth here, that means it's going to print from the first element all the way to actually the nth element. So let's have a quick example. So we're going to say print. So print family. Then in that case, so if you now place this, it's going to actually print all the elements. So you see you now have 6 Joma, 2 Chelsea, Kisaka, and so. So what happens in cases where we want to print maybe from Joma? So we're going to say from index 1 all the way to the last element. So you see now that it starts from Joma continuously. So we're going to also maybe what happens if you want to print up to only Kisaka. So you're going to only place index 3. So it's going to print all the way from the first element, that's index number 0, 1, 2, and 3. So this actually tells us that it's not going to include Chelsea. So for our index, we're going to have this fourth. So it's now going to print up to this point. So from the index number 1 to actually the index placed here is index number 4. So we can perform actually like slicing in between. So maybe you want to print from Juma to Chelsea only. So that should be index number 1, 2, 3 to actually index number 4 because it's always n minus 1. So we're going to print from index number 1 to it. That will print Juma, 2, and Chelsea. So if you now run that, you see now that's Juma, 2, and Chelsea. So the next thing we want to do is, let's say we have a list. Then we want to maybe update a list. So to actually do that, so we're going to use the index and then update. So maybe you want to update this from 6 to maybe update it to one of our member family has joined us. So we are going to actually update it. So we're going to put in the index. So index 0, then we want to assign it to maybe an index of maybe Salma. Salma has joined our family. Then we want to actually place this into the family. So to make sure that you are updating the right list, so your variable name, so that your list name should come before it. So if you see now that we are updating the family list, and in that family list we are updating index 0. Index 0 is number 6, and then if you now print this, then it's going to print actually all our family. So let's try and see. Wow, now that we have updated now our elements. So in the family now, we have Salma as our new family member. So I want you to maybe like, yeah, I remember our numbers. So we have the numbers, a list of numbers. So maybe you have 3, 6, down, that number on 4. So I want you to use iteration. So I remember iterations from our last maybe beginner track. I want you to maybe use a loop and loop all through these elements and get me the largest number. Make sure you do the solution and research. Then I'll see you in the next video.